Good morning and welcome to my hobby bench once again for a quick look video on an OS Max engine. Now, I call it quick look, but they're not always quick, the videos, because many times, as many of you know, it's not necessarily about looking at the engine, it's about looking at the things that come with the engine that are of interest to me historically and just from my curiosity. And I like to do a little bit of detective work with this. But this is an engine I happened to find on eBay. It's not new in box. It appears to have been used. But it's an engine that's never been featured on my channel before, which is really cool, which is one of the only reasons I got it. And it's an OS Max 25 FSR. Now I have featured a 25F before, but not the 25 FSR. This engine dates back production release to 1977. Part of what we're going to do here today is look at the contents of this box and try to determine is this engine from 1977 or from a later time period. Those are the types of things that I think are interesting, and there's a lot of stuff in this box that didn't come with this engine, and that's kind of what's cool too. So here we are. Here's the engine itself. The engine is a beautiful example. It could almost look like it's never been run, but I'm pretty sure it has been run. In fact, it wasn't listed as new in box or new at all by the fellow that sold this to me out of Canada, and he sells a lot of engines. It's got incredibly good compression. Now, one of the things about the 25 FSR is that this is a cast iron piston engine. It's not the ABC that the F version was. It looks like it comes with an OS 2B carb, and this is a little snug turning, which is also an indication to me that it has been run. I wasn't necessarily planning on opening up the rear cover or looking at the opening, taking the head off, but that's a potential. That is something I might potentially do. But this is the engine, and it comes with the 762 OS 762 muffler. Now let's get to some of the things that came in this box that are really quite interesting, I think. And one of the first things that I think is interesting that came in this box is something completely unrelated to this engine, which is a piston ring, a new in package OS Max H piston ring for a 60 GP or a 60F GP engine. Now that's interesting to me because, well, it's just interesting that this would be included in this engine. Apparently this fellow, I guess he gets these engines from exhaust. I guess the fellow that sells these engines maybe gets them from estate sales or something like that. I don't know why this is in here, but it's kind of cool. The next thing that's interesting, and I'm pretty sure is maybe original to this engine, is a pair of open end wrenches that are actually OS wrenches. They'll say they have, I don't know if you're going to be able to see that or not. Maybe if I get it at a weird angle, you'll be able to see that it has OS stamped on it. So that's interesting. The other thing that's really interesting, hopefully you'll be able to see this, is a clear piece of silicone tubing. Remember that video I put out a few weeks ago about, I think it was called the fuel tubing trick? Well, it's not a trick necessarily because OS was actually doing it and advertising it in their manuals. And this is on in the bag, and it's not on the high-speed needle, which it would be right here. You can see through there, you would see that it would be right in this area here, and it's not on there. Which is interesting to me because it makes me wonder, was this engine run like that without that on there? Doesn't look like it's ever been pulled out of that bag. Maybe that's why, I don't know. All I can say is it's not on there and it should be on there, and we'll get to the point where it actually mentions that in the instructions. Piece of cardboard tube. These usually, in the old days, 80s, 70s, and 80s would come as a protector for the high-speed needle. What's this? This is interesting because it's a separate bag. Don't know why it wouldn't have been included in this bag. I'm not sure what all is original to this engine, but this is a wrench, and it appears to have a replacement screw for the carb. One replacement screw for the carb when the carb is attached with 2 screws. That's what that screw looks like. Is that something that came with these engines? I have no idea. Then you've got your standard, we've seen this a million times, your little OS booklet on warnings. That's no big deal. Here's where it starts to get a little more interesting. Now, OS was always, you know, in this day was always providing these mounting templates. But this one has 2. One that was clearly had some holes punched in it for some reason, but these mounting holes weren't popped out, which is what you normally see. But they're both for a 21 FSR ABC, 25 FSR, 25F ABC. So at least these templates mention the 25 FSR and 25F ABC in the same card, and I don't believe that those engines were of the same vintage because the 25F came out in 1982, whereas the 25 FSR came out in 1977. So maybe we've already seen our first clue, if these things are original to this, maybe we've already seen our first clue as to the vintage of this particular engine. The next thing of interest in this box is that it came with a whole set, a screw set, a replacement screw set, 25 FSR, the screw set. So apparently whoever, and like I said, I can only speculate, but if I were to look at this and say this is what I would do, it looks like somebody said, well, I'm going to buy some extra stuff because I love this engine and I'm going to have it for a long time and I want to have spare parts. That would be the only reason that I would purchase something like this for an engine if they were still available at the time and say, hey, I want a spare screw set. Like the mounting instructions, I've got 2 sets of instructions that came with it, but these 2 sets of instructions are quite different, which is very interesting. I'm going to look at this first one here that's a little bit more faded. It looks older. And I'll show you why this is so interesting. Is that this one, this side of the page is in Japanese, as is some of the title here, and then we've got the English version here. You turn this over, same thing, Japanese, English. Why is that interesting? Because this one, I thought there was, oh, wait a minute. Oh, this is just the carb instructions. Okay, so we'll get to the other part that's interesting. This is just the instructions for the carb. So there's 2 sets of instructions for the carb. They're identical. This is also where it shows, I thought it was showing, talked about that. Was it on here? Stand by 1 second here. I'm looking for that reference of where it talks about the fuel tubing. Maybe it's on the instructions. We'll have to check. So, 2 sets of carb instructions. Now, we got 2 sets of engine instructions. This is the one I thought I was going to say was very interesting. And again, you can see one of them, hopefully you can tell, one of them, this one here, is a little bit yellowed. Would appear to be older. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it was just subjected to different environmental conditions. But this one is entirely English. Entirely English. Everything in here is English. I'm still taking a quick look at this, because I know for a fact I saw mention of the fuel tubing going on there. I may have to pause the video to find this, so I don't take up too much time, but I will find it. So anyway, interesting. Here it talks about using a NOS number 8 plug for this. Okay, so why is this interesting? Because this set of instructions would appear to be older, because like those carb instructions, this is fully in Japanese. You open it up, it continues in Japanese on this page, and then here we've got the whole set of instructions that's in English. So it's almost like this was prior to maybe coming to the United States. I don't know. Well, why would you have two completely different sets of instructions? One that's obviously the ones that were for English were printed. This was cut or whatever and printed specifically for those engines going to the United States market or English-speaking markets. Whereas they would make this for engines that could go either place, potentially. I'm guessing here. But here it's interesting because it talks about scale, the prop sizes, which is interesting for me because I need to see if I got a prop. I'd like to take this out and run it. I would like to get this engine out and run it very, very soon. It's just past mid-November and the weather is very beautiful today outside. It's sunny, it's cold, but we don't have snow and I can access the flying field. I would like to see if I can get this thing out there and run this today if possible. I'm going to have to pause the video and find that section on the fuel tubing on here because I want to prove to you that that is something that OS put in writing. But here's the last thing that's interesting is the marketing literature that came with this, and this should really kind of put the nail in the coffin as to the timeline of this engine, assuming everything is original here, which obviously some of it isn't. Some of the paperwork isn't original because there's duplicates. But I've got some notes here. The 25 FSR came out in 1977. The 90 FSR, which is shown here, not 91, the 91 FSR, the 90 FSR, 78. Let's see here, as far as two strokes, the 25F shows here, that's a 1982 engine. And we flip it over here and look at the four strokes. They were still showing the FS80. How many of you have ever seen an FS80 rear rocker engine? And they're not showing the 90, which is interesting because a friend of mine, Harvey, has an FS80 and 90. I've had 7 or 8 FS90s. But I think Harvey sent me his FS80 years ago that I ran. But it's interesting that here it doesn't show the 90, so I'll have to go and look on my timeline and see when the 90 came out. But it does show this FS120, which came out in 1983. So now we've bumped up the year yet again here, and that maybe if this marketing literature and the engine at least were in the same box, that kind of puts this engine at the point of being a 1983 vintage engine, even though it was released in 1977. So it kind of also then gives us a timeline for how long it was in production, an estimated timeline for how long it was in production. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the video, turn the video off, and I'm going to find that part on the tubing, and I'm going to show you that real quick, and then we'll end this video and we'll be done with it, and hopefully I'll get this out there to the field very soon to run. Okay, I turned the video back on. I found it here. It was really under a section titled needle valve. Let me see if I can zoom in here so this is more in focus and you can read it too. Hopefully you'll be able to read it. It says needle valve. This engine is fitted with a short tubular seal between the needle and body to prevent air leakage into or fuel leakage from the needle valve. When the seal becomes worn or damaged after a long period of use, replace with a spare seal provided. Okay, so that was a spare seal in there. Or cut a short piece of silicone fuel tubing as a replacement. And it even shows where it goes here in the picture. So there you go. That's right from the OS manual. They talk about that. So I think that's an interesting sideline there to that. Now I know in the video I mentioned briefly about potentially looking inside this engine. Let me see, let me grab and take it out and run it and let it get nice and hot, or heat it up first. Now that didn't have much of a torque to it, although it still was torqued. Let's see, look here real quick. See if we can see any kind of rust or anything like that. Let's see if the seal will not be broken. Yeah, look, that's been run. It has an odd smell. But yeah,
there's some swirling
on that back plate, so this is clearly not a new engine.
See if I can get one of these lights to angle in here nicely. It's very smooth, so there's nothing wrong with the bearings.
Let me stick my head in here real quick. Yeah, it looks beautiful in there.
You can see, hopefully you can see some of that residue.
And of course I didn't bring a paper towel in here with me. Do I? Nope. I just have to wipe that off my box. Okay, so that's our quick look inside here. I'm going to put this back on there and take this out and see if I can find an appropriate size prop for this thing and get this engine on the stand and maybe get a run in it on it today, if possible, if not very soon.